For more analysis, we're joined again by Mr. Seth Schachner, an international relations expert from Los Angeles, to discuss the potential scenarios following the 2024 US elections, considering the implications of either Trump or Harris winning on global conflicts and economy. Good evening to you, sir.
Good morning from LA. Good evening.
Yes, good morning then. So, how do Harris and Trump's foreign policies differ in terms of multilateralism vis-a-vis the unilateralism?
That's an excellent question. I think probably, I think the case right now can probably most be made around what Mr. Trump's policies were, basically just based on, his past presidency from 2016 to 2020. More of an America First unilateralism policy and kind of a strong approach to different international relationships, and perhaps a bit more aggressive with things like trade wars, perhaps serving American citizens in the short run, and perhaps more unpredictable. But I think in the case of Harris, it's not really entirely clear. She was vaulted into this spot just a few months ago, and when Mr. Biden's a lot of us here, it's a bit undefined, to be honest with you, even with her vice presidency. So I think that part's a little bit unclear in terms of what the strategy will be for her. But I think it'll probably be closer for him, if he does succeed, to what we saw in the prior presidency in terms of how he manages that.
Now, you spoke about America First policy of Mr. Trump during the 2020. Now, we're speaking of what long-term impact could Trump's America First policy have on you, the world body, the United Nations, for instance?
He's been clearly, a skeptic and bit of pushing on some of the traditional constraints that my country has been part of for many years. And I mean, it's not clear if he would sever, but he certainly has more of a very proactive policy towards paying your dues, and not just having the U.S. support all the members without some form of consideration coming back. And I think that's a real worry, not only on the part of people who worked with him, but for those of us who are, big supporters of international relationships and see engagement and cooperation as a key to American foreign policy going forward. But yeah, I think it could be quite divisive in terms of how he approaches both of those interests if he does succeed in his second term. So people are concerned about that for sure.
Now, on the other hand, Mrs. Harris here, and how would Harris' emphasis on alliances, especially with NATO, shift U.S. foreign policy in Europe and Asia?
Well, again, she's a bit of an unknown commodity, at least to me. She's someone who I think folks have perhaps more grasp of what her domestic thinking is and what she's at least said in her campaign. I live in California, and she was Attorney General here, and I think there's a relative degree of familiarity and support for her here in California because she was in San Francisco for many years. I don't know if it's really clear yet in terms of how that would play out internationally. I mean, I think if one were to perhaps guess or extrapolate, maybe it wouldn't be so different from the Biden administration's approach. That's a guess because she said very forcefully, I'm on the ballot here, not him. But I personally wouldn't expect radical changes from how, President Biden and Secretary Blinken, and our foreign policy teams have approached matters internationally. That's just my personal view.
How would Harris and Trump's approach towards the Israeli war on Gaza affect the U.S. relations with the Middle East? And will they differ?
They probably would differ. I think, the former is probably more supportive and libertine, and probably would allow Israel to quote unquote get the job done. I think those are the words that have been used. And I think you can look back to the past administration to see his record of support. I mean, Vice President Harris has been.
What, from your point of view, sir, do you think the meaning of what Mr. Trump said will have to get it done? What does this mean, or how would we expect that to mean?
I would expect there to be less pressure, and probably, in terms of how how he accommodates that going forward. But I don't think it's entirely clear with how she would approach. She's been very, very supportive, but she's also sensitive to different, voting blocks here and different communities around the state. So I probably expect her to be a little bit more aggressive than what President Biden has been. Biden and the team, I think, have just given an ultimatum actually for the Gaza situation. So I think you'd probably see, more proactive approach to managing it from President Harris or any Democratic, candidate going forward.
Regarding the Iranian nuclear deal, how would Trump's skepticism of the Iranian deal or the Iranian nuclear deal and Harris' support for rejoining it affect the U.S.-Iran relations?
I think that's going to be a very critical thing. I mean, I don't know what'll happen, obviously, in the election tonight, but I do think that, whether they renew that, support it, is personally something that I think is a very key thing for the region. But I think it's unclear. I really don't feel comfortable guessing on how it would work right now or putting, projections or hypothetical scenarios on it. But it's for sure a key issue in terms of how they approach it.
Now, from your point of view, what could be the risks and benefits of Harris and Trump's differing approaches towards the Russian-Ukraine conflict?
I think, if you're looking at balancing global alliances that are emerging, I think the risk there, if it's not managed in a way that ultimately leads to peace and some balance in the region, you could have something more broadly, erupt, whether it's there or in other parts of the world like Taiwan. So I think there needs to be a pretty active form of engagement. I personally support ending that conflict as soon as possible. And I would hope either candidate would move towards that, actually. But yeah, the risk is that not attending to it allows that fire to keep burning and could really unbalance things and cause a lot more harm.
Regarding the NATO and what strategic consequences could arise if Trump withdraws from the NATO compared to Harris' commitment to it?
I think there's a huge factor in terms of balancing those regions with America's Western European allies, basically, and their safety and the security and the troops that are there and the entire balance of the regional economies that are sitting in Europe there. So I think pulling out of NATO would put a lot of those things at risk, actually. And I don't think this is an issue where either candidate is going to be quick to do something and do something in a very unpredictable way. I'm sure there'll be plenty of dialogue and communications with America's allies and even within our government from our State Department, no matter who's in the White House. But yeah, I mean, similar to the last thing I just answered to you, that's a situation that needs to be, managed and engaged actively. And the NATO alliance is something that I don't should walk away from so quickly.
Right, so that was Mr. Seth Schachner, an international relations expert from Los Angeles. Thank you so much for your insights.